Hey, this is David and Ben with Redline Rebuilds, and we're going through our small block Chevy time lapse, which
the second small block
the
Chevy
second one,
time
the
lapse.
beginning, and now hopefully not the end, right? I mean, bookended a little bit, but we thought we'd throw a little bit of everything at this build from what we've done in the past with all the different shots and those types of things, but sticking with a stock-ish build. So basically, in a nutshell, this is a 283 out of a 66 Chevelle, and who knows how many. And that's what it'll also be going back into. Yep. And I have no idea how many miles are on it overall.
Well, because it's been sitting for 25 years.
Yeah, it hasn't ran since '97. Actually, it hasn't been in a car since '97. So there's been a couple pieces that got kind of moved back and forth, one little mismatched valve cover, and so on and so forth. But greasy and grimy, and in need of cleaning up for sure.
Oh yeah, I mean, as far as the intro here goes, we opted for the little stop motion treatment, which is pretty fun.
And just for a little trivia, that blue towels, that was a bathrobe at one time.
Nice. That's good stuff. So yep, I mean, not much other than just pure entertainment here, but I mean, as it comes apart, you can tell it was tired when it got left, and then
yes,
of course the whole smell of this room. If there was smell-o-vision, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that can smell that old oil smell.
Yep.
Because I went home every day smelling like it.
Yeah, the shop stunk, quite frankly.
Yep.
Somebody said that David deserves a pay decrease since the engine disassembled itself.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I was sitting on the
pass
beach.
it to me.
Yeah, that was just sitting on the beach while this was happening.
I will say this was my first time ever disassembling an entire engine.
And you did well, because there were no broken studs, unlike when I do it. So that was good.
I think I only had to use
I don't think we had to heat anything.
No, there was one stud I think I ended up having to heat. But I forget.
That's not bad.
But no, everything mostly came undone. It was oily, so it wasn't like it had been like sitting in water or anything like that.
No,
or,
right.
Under it, sitting outside for 20 years.
Yeah. No.
So yeah, continuing to disassemble here, intake manifold, taking itself off, which is fun.
Which is very cool. Very cool indeed.
It was, maybe we can throw some of the GoPro time lapses that I shot of me actually doing this, of the constant back and forth. I'll tell you what, my legs were sore at the end of this. I'm just stepping back. It was like doing lunges.
Lunges
back
all
and
day.
forth.
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, there wasn't. I mean, you were busy finishing up the Jeep motor at this point, while I was trying to get this started so we could at least kind of get it in line at the machine shop. But no surprises. We did have to refer back to these photos. I think I ended up keeping all the mains in the right position, but we kept kind of double checking. But that eventually, the reason we were double checking was because...
Yes, because I'll take the heat for it. I forgot to mention when we pull it apart to make sure that they were stamped.
Well, stamped, but it's not even that. Even with them in the right spot, that we're pretty sure that we had them in the right spot.
Yeah.
It ended up needing...
we ended up having to line hone it. But I really think what that was, not so much that the caps got put in the wrong spot. Of course, we matched everything up with pictures, so we had something to go by. But I really think what happened was, in the course of heating it to clean it at the machine shop, it just basically stress relieved itself and kind of moved around. So, and it doesn't take a whole lot for things not to turn very well if they're out. Like 10 thousandths can be a problem. So
we can talk about that a little bit more when we get to the install part. But all the pistons came out nice. There wasn't much of a lip, which you ended up you got 30 over?
Yeah, I did 30 over just for there's no 10 over pistons. And we were also fighting for all intents and purposes, we still are in a situation of parts availability. And that's one of the reasons why we went with a small block Chevy, is because those parts are still fairly available. There were some things that I had to borrow from another motor, specifically a pump rod for the fuel pump, but because none are available in the country.
Now you owe somebody a
Yeah, I do.
pump rod.
Yep, exactly.
Here we got the timing gear coming off, which proved to be down the road. Speaking of trying to find parts.
Yep. So that is, and from everything I can tell on this motor has never been a part. Of course, a good witness is the fact that the main caps were not stamped as far as numbered were concerned.
But the
rods were.
Rods were.
So that was interesting. It's kind of a conflict there. It didn't appear that the timing chain had been replaced, even though it's fairly common that timing chain would be replaced because of that nylon on the big gear. GM did that to basically quiet things down. The problem was the longevity of that wasn't so great. Lots of times you found them in the pickup of the oil pump. It would strip them right off, and there they would be laying.
So everything was nice and dirty, and into the parts washer it went.
Yep.
And
then
heads.
fully disassemble the heads. You can see I already cleaned up some of the flashing on them before we tore them down.
Yeah, you did quite a bit of that.
And actually, the reason is processing, because Thoroughbreeze was so slammed with stuff to do that we had to basically minimize how much they had to do. So deburred everything, stripped it all down, and then took it them just for the blast.
Yep. So here we are at Thoroughbreeze. The same old, but I gotta say I enjoy watching the process every time. It's a cool place to be. I mean, you see with all these videos, everybody sees enough of this shop. It's just a cool old machine shop.
Well, and the variety of stuff they work on is amazing.
Yep.
I mean, truly,
enormous diesel cat motors to, small British engines and
motorcycle stuff.
A whole lot of Subaru heads.
Lots of Subaru heads, yes. And you'll get because of all the boats and stuff up here, you also get the occasional Hercules engine that'll roll in there for boats, and old stuff. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, a lot of marine stuff. They had one time in there. They had that enormous turbocharged thing for a Coast Guard.
From the Coast Guard boat, yeah.
So I mean, we can still talk about for the uninitiated. It's probably
process-wise. So we go through and we, clean everything up. We bake it. We blast it. It goes through the tumble process and all that, and then we go through the machining operations. So, for instance, here you go through and you deck the face of the, deck the deck basically, where the piston or where the cylinder head bolts down to on the block. Make sure that's nice and square, because they'll have a tendency to shift or not be great from the factory. That's also the case, but it ensures a clean assembly and sealing up correctly. And we also have the Mark, he has his own patented process of how he finishes that, meaning it's not too smooth and it's not too rough. So then you can use either head gaskets, either composite or the MLS gaskets. So
interesting. I didn't know that made a difference.
Yeah.
And then also too was Mike was doing this, which Mike appreciates but also dislikes. Saving the.
Saving because of the numbers matching aspect of this block. The pad, GM stamps up on the pad all the numbers relative to the car, depending on some years, but it's matching to the car that it came out of, and of course do not want to remove that because then you have no proof that it's the matching numbers. Given that you have a fly cutter that cuts a radius about that big, luckily you can stop it short, but again, Mike doesn't like to do that because it's easier just to sweep all the way across it, and you have to be a little more attentive to it. But it worked out good.
Yeah, he always does a great job.
Mm-hmm.
So as we mentioned before, we're honing this out to, or boring it out to.
Yep. 30 over, 30 over some stock. And this is a 283, so it's 3.875, so 3 7/8 bore stock. So now we're at, was it 905?
And then even in this process, there's the hone, but then the brush, right, is what it takes through afterwards. So.
Yeah, so you go through and hone it, and then you run a brush down through it, which looks in the video look kind of the same.
Exactly the same. Yeah.
Because it's on like a hone stone, but it's a fine brush that goes in and basically cleans all those cross hatches out more.
And then you can see his bore
gauge
there that he. I mean, you're going to what, the 1,000th here, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And then checking it all the way down to, multiple spots down the bore, not only in the radius of it or the diameter of it, but then also down from the cylinder. Make sure it's.
Now I don't know if it's been asked in the comments specifically of this video, but I know that it has been, as we do this for this part of the process for all of them.
Right.
But the question that I see a lot is, specifically when we bore it, why don't we use a boring bar?
Well, technically that is a boring bar.
Well, sorry, not a boring bar, but the boring plate. When you tension the
okay.
torque the.
Yeah, so it is. Yeah, it's a boring bar, but so correct. So based on what the end application will be, yes, you would bore with plates, as they call it. So basically, you put a plate on top, you bolt it down just like it was a cylinder head, and then you bore down through it. The idea is it stresses or torques that whole surface down like it's going to be in the application. So then when you measure it, you're actually measuring how it's going to be when the heads are torqued down, opposed to kind of in a free state, if you will. So given the street application of this, it's really not necessary to do torque plates.
So when we talk about, all the measuring and stuff that you do on this, that's like that next level of blueprinting.
Yeah.
Where it's like, when you're getting into high horsepower, high RPM, then all those things make that much more.
Yep. Then that makes more sense.
All right, on to the heads. What's Mark doing here?
Mark looks like he's honing the guides, reaming the guides out. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, reaming the guides out. Yeah, so basically went through and freshened the guides, and then put fresh seats in everything, intake and exhaust. And
the reason, typically you would only do on the intake or only do the, no,
well,
only do the exhaust?
Usually on the, lots of times you'll do just the exhaust because they're not hardened, which in the day, just the standard casting was acceptable for the fuels with the tetraethanol lead or whatever we want to call that, the lead portion of the gasoline. And the new fuel, if you will, from the 70s is hotter, quite frankly. So you put the hardened seats in because then you don't burn the seats as easily.
And they burn and therefore it deteriorates.
Yes, quicker. It's not an issue on the intakes because the intake side has the fuel coming in, so it keeps them cooler. So there'll be a big difference in temperature between intake and exhaust seats, even though they're quarter-inch away.
Interesting. And like you were saying here, as we get into disassembling the old pistons, is they were busy, so they put you to work.
Yep. Yeah, exactly right. That's right. It's a good experience.
Yep.
So popping those off, and then Mike goes through and let him do all the specialty work here, where he clips the caps before we clean up the big ends.
And that's essentially you're to prep for new bearings, right?
Yes, it's twofold. So you're taking the stock rod. I put in the ARP bolts in there. That typically distorts when you press those in anyway. That distorts one side of the rod side of the cap, and then you go in and torque that cap on, which is also a higher torque than stock. Okay. Not by a whole lot, usually 5 pounds, 5 maybe 10. And then now if you will, you've taken that cap and a rod assembly and kind of done this a little bit.
Turn it into a football instead of a basketball.
Yeah. So then you go through and you clip the cap, basically shorten it up and go through and resize it. So that's what this process is. He really needs to clean that Sunnet machine. I never realized how grungy that thing is.
There's not much in there that isn't grungy. I don't think they got too much stuff going on to worry about clean. And it's just like 5 minutes later, it's going to have oil.
So if you're looking for an internship in a machine shop, tell Joey at the front desk that I sent you over there and you want to just clean the machines. It's not glamorous, but it will be satisfying.
So then we are off to Apex competition engines.
So we make a quick jump here by about 100 miles? Roughly 100 miles. 100 miles south into a little more specific of a specialized machine shop engine builder. John at Apex, they build about 50 to 60, really all small block Chevys. For the most part. I mean, there's other stuff
Fords
mixed in there.
Yeah.
Specifically for the racing up here. So dirt track and asphalt and drag racers. And this is actually the same. You can see the dyno in the back where I blew the lights off the ceiling because that was awesome. That's a whole other story.
Everyone appreciated that.
Yeah. But yeah, so we brought it down here specifically because Thoroughbase doesn't do any balancing. So they don't balance rotating assemblies. So I brought it down to John just to do the balancing. And quite frankly, we could do all the machine work here, but the convenience of across the town is a lot nicer than 100 miles away. So we kind of pick and choose what we do there. So in this case, what he's doing is taking the rod assemblies, and the whole idea is that the rods from the big end to the small end are exactly the same weight. And then you go through and you measure all your pistons, make sure those are all at the same weight. That gives you a bob weight, it's referred to, and then is mocked up really onto the crankshaft, and then that spinning function, a lot like a tire balancer. They go through and then you balance or remove material or add material to the crankshaft, counterweights to balance the assembly. So if it was a tire, you'd put wheel weights on there, but obviously it's not, so you don't do it that way.
And I will say here, just plug that a lot of the stuff that we're discussing here, we do talk about in
and all the updates.
Like there's a specific update about this process that if you're interested in that, you can go back and watch.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was fun being down there. Cool to see another process happen.
Yeah, here's your bob weight functions. And the biggest reason I did balancing on a stock engine is the fact that I went to non-stock pistons, which are quite a bit heavier than the OE cast ones. So you need to compensate for that. Or you can have less longevity of your bearings, whichever you choose.
So again, if you watch the Redline update video on this, you'll know that we kind of didn't show it here, but you added some weight to the crankshaft. Actually, you can see it right here in this shot. Right here.
Yep.
Added some weight, but then after that it needed even more weight, which is why you see John coming in here.
And filling in the factory holes, basically.
Yep.
With weld.
Which has gotten drilled out at the factory, too.
Yeah, to balance for the other pistons, yep.
So he ended up adding some via welding, and then also, as he kind of go back and forth, trying to fine-tune it, drilled out. There you go. Comes in with the drill press.
Yep.
Drilling out in certain spots, filling in certain spots.
And I'm going to circumvent the next question that we will have. No, the amount of heat that we put into the counterweights when he's welding did not warp the crankshaft. Because that's actually a very good question, but I know that'll come up, and no, we did not. This is this is standard process.
Because at this point, too, we'd already had the crankshaft ground.
Yep. Yes. Yeah, crankshaft is ground, because you need everything at the size and weight that it's going to be at.
All right, and now we are off to prep for paint and get paint. And I was pretty psyched with how this turned out. I don't know if I shot a GoPro shot of myself of doing this, but this was, I made myself a jig, and then I actually glued this piece of wood here that held the valve cover to the table.
To the table.
And then had to take a single picture, take the valve cover off, put it in the vapor hone, just vapor hone a
spot.
tiny little spot of it, bring it back. I want to say it took me 4 hours to vapor
You're
hone
a better
this,
man than I am for patience.
this one thing.
Nice.
But hey,
It's a cool shot. It turned out
I
really
like how
good.
how it turned out.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet.
That'll be one that I save a GIF of and
There you go.
post to my social media accounts and whatnot.
And then basically prep for paint like you would anything else. Tape it off.
This is kind of, I mean, from the questions that we typically get, which is like, why don't you just put it together and spray bomb it?
Yeah. I know. That's exactly what the factory did. And that's not an incorrect statement. I just like to have, I equate it to this. I like the look of a room when I go into it, that somebody pulled the trim off the door frame, painted the room, painted the trim, and then put it on, not taped everything off, like separately. It just doesn't look as crisp.
When you get up close, you see the detail that went into it. You don't.
I guess silly that way. There's other words for it, but it's just the way I like to do things.
So part of that
what it
is what you actually have the gasket that you're going to use.
Yeah, going to use, and then trim it off, and you can see it in the one shot because, well, right here, right there, where I'm that little circle cutout. If you just mask across the top face that was machined off, then you'd have that little bare spot, and of course you're going to have rust right away. And
you pull it off there,
and does it matter? Well, to some, like me. And for those of you that appreciate it, thank you. We're kindred spirits, as they say. I tell you what, one of the things I'm going to caution everybody on here is when you clean your, and I don't think we've ever talked about this. So we go through, there'll be, we'll clean everything, blah, blah, blah. You always want to clean it again. And it has nothing to do with any specific machine shop, none of that. It's always just, it's in a washer. The parts washer does what it does, right? Mm-hmm. But go through and run a brush through all the passages, use some Dawn dish soap in a bucket, hose it all off real good, but be ready immediately to start drying it. Mm-hmm. I'll be out here and it might take 15, 20 minutes to clean the block, and then I'll spend another 40 minutes or better just drying it off. Earplugs in, because I tell you what, when you run that compressed air over those holes, it whistles like crazy.
It's ear piercing.
Yes.
For sure.
But dry it off really good. I always start with the cylinder bores, and if I'm thinking about it quick enough, I'll actually have a rag with oil already and just wipe something on them. I prefer that Silver Stallion stuff, but WD-40, any of that type of stuff, any oil is better than none. But just something so you don't get flash rust on everything. That's the whole point. And the same thing, you're going to blow out every one of the threads so they don't rust. And I mean, just blow all the water out of it. And it doesn't take long, but you won't have other problems down the road as far as...
Especially if it's going to sit for a week or two or a year, as can be the case with a lot of people's projects. Like, all right, I'm getting it ready, and then
if it's going to sit for a year, oil the daylights out of it. Because I have a block, I got a block and a crankshaft given to me quite a few years ago, that the guy went and had all the machine work done, put it in the bag from the machine shop, and left it. And it was a rusted piece of nothing. I mean, it was a shame that was wasted.
Yeah.
And trust me, this project was supposed to be done a couple of years ago. But time sneaks up on you somehow. I'm sure I'm the only one, but. Primer. Mm-hmm. Primer everything over and shoot the orange. Now, I'm going to say this. If you're going to spray your motor orange, I am finding that I would spray, and this is after some discussion with Daryl at Trevor's Body and Paint. The orange doesn't cover well.
It's thin. It's a thin paint,
well, it's viscosity wise, it's the same as all of them, but the paint just doesn't cover. Mm-hmm. The color doesn't cover.
Yep.
So what we were talking about is instead of doing a primer you can either tint your primer, but then we also talk about doing a top coat or a first coat of red and then doing orange over the top of it. Now, granted, you're going to have some change in that top hue, but it wouldn't have the black to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
when you look real close, you can see.
You can't tell in any of the video, but if you're looking at it up close, you can kind of see any like sharp edges or peaks or anything.
Yep.
In the casting.
And don't get me wrong, cast stuff is hard to paint anyway, because it has a lot of voids in it. So think about it as, if you took 24 grit sandpaper and tried to paint it, you're gonna have a whole bunch of dots hanging up there.
Yep.
So anything you can do to help that, which I spent a fair amount of time sanding on the outside just to get some of that natural grain off of there. Nice, that was cool.
Yeah, I'm going to go over that because that shot didn't quite work out the way that I wanted it to go.
You didn't even get any overspray on the table. How'd you pull that one off?
Magic.
Dang.
So, well, one of the
rolling tape is cool.
Our famous shots here of rolling the tape off, which is actually kind of satisfying to shoot in a way.
Yep. Oh, and I'm gonna plug the 3D printer. So scroll back just a little bit. Right there. So on the sides where the freeze plugs or core plugs, if you choose, are, I find it's a bear to tape those off. And yes, I could just shove in the steel plugs and be done and then paint them, blah, blah, blah. But I put brass plugs in and I like the contrast of the brass to the orange. So not taping off.
We're learning a lot about your personality.
I know. Point is, these plugs are 3D printed plugs. So I can quickly just pop them in there, and they have that little ridge on there. You can grab them with a pair of pliers if you need to kind of wiggle them out. But it's an easy, quick way to tape it off, if you will, and it seems to work quite well. Yeah. So that's my
if
plug.
They break
if you have
disappear,
just print off more.
Print a couple more.
In fact, Daryl was pretty envious of I call them traffic cones. So I printed off some traffic cones that were about that tall. So then we painted like the oil pan and any of the tin work. I just stood them on those. Yeah. And you got a little bit of overspray come up underneath them, but for the most part, that edge would be painted that way.
Right. And also not just stick to whatever it's sitting on.
Instead of using the masking tape rolls, they work fine too, but just a trick if you happen to have a printer laying around or a buddy that's got one.
Which you can get them on Amazon or whatever. They're pretty cheap ones, especially if you're only printing small stuff out.
Exactly.
It's always fun.
Yeah, that's a cool shot.
Got the probe lens, get a little different point of view.
Yeah. You don't get to look at the cam rings that way ever, quite honestly.
We talk about using a bore scope for stuff from time to time. You can almost see if you're lined up with the oil hole or not. Yep. So anything to point out as far as this?
Yeah, nothing. I mean, on a Chevy, it makes sense where you locate that hole in the cam bearing. So every engine has its need. Mm-hmm. These have a big groove in the casting, so you position the hole, you clock it, and it's not relative to the through hole that feeds that groove. It's relative to other science. But depending on what you're running, there's some of them you have to do because the bearing actually has a groove in it instead.
And as mentioned earlier, putting in your plugs there, and I gotta admit, I do like the contrast.
Isn't that nice?
It is.
And
it looks thought out as opposed to just kind of like, especially the total opposite, which is the put it all together and then spray everything. Where you're spraying the gaskets, you're spraying all that kind of stuff, which then will flake off and get oil and.
Yep. It just looks crisper.
Yep.
And I know it's just an engine. Somebody. And Mikey even complimented me on positioning the core plugs, freeze plugs, so the lettering was right side up when it flipped it over, and all the same.
I would imagine if you were hiring somebody to build an engine for you, you'd kind of maybe want to know that their attention to detail is that sort of.
I like to think so.
Detail, for lack of a better word that we use here.
A nicer word.
Yeah. All right, so what's going on here?
Going through and miking the crankshaft. So I say it over and over and over again. When you assemble this motor, It is, I'll say it, actually I haven't said it this way. When you assemble the motor, you are building the motor. So that means you're measuring and you're putting everything together. Yes, you've requested this, you've requested that, and it's been a conversation. But at the end of the day, when that motor doesn't run or something breaks on it, guess whose responsibility it is? And that's, in this picture right here, the guy with those hands, it's his responsibility. The crank guy did what he did. The guy that cut the bore did what he did, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, you're the one putting it together. It's your responsibility that everything is right. So, for instance, I always go through, I give Doug all the numbers that I want the crankshaft to, but I check them because, well, stuff happens, and that's okay. And you want to find out now opposed to later.
And if you've ever been to Doug's shop, I mean, granted, you had your name written on this one and everything, but like, there's stuff that goes to his shop that are small block cranks that would look exactly the same, and maybe you
100%.
go and you grab, and he goes, oh yeah, it's sitting over there in the corner, and you go, okay, cool, thanks, and you grab it, and you walk out with it, and it's not yours.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, yep. No, that's exactly, yeah, because I think sitting there when we went there, he's got a small shop. It was what, maybe 20 by 30, maybe 40, and what did he have? Somewhere around 200-300 crankshafts in there.
Yeah, he had
just standing up
pallet racks.
Yeah, not to mention the pallet rack full. Yeah, so.
Yeah, pretty amazing little shop. One guy and one employee in middle of Michigan, just going through crankshafts every day.
Yeah.
So on to the camshaft installation here.
Yes. So.
Make you walk super slow.
Yeah.
Shuffle.
Yep.
You can always tell when it's finally summer in Traverse City because
there's extra glow in the room from my legs.
David has his shorts on.
My shop legs. Yep. So I'll clarify again, and I'll say this probably 6 more times. I did not reuse the timing gear. I only used the stock timing gear to reassemble it because it was handy. There was a question, and you know how it goes. And the lube that just puts itself on the crankshaft there. Nice job, John, by the way. I think this was your first foray into stop motion, if I remember right.
Probably around,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, you've been around it, but did a nice job. The red assembly lube is Redline branded assembly lube.
No affiliation to us.
No affiliation to us. Although that wouldn't be a bad thing. But anyhow, I lubricate all the bearings, camshaft, pretty much all
lifters.
Of that stuff. Yeah, lifters, all the valve train stuff with that. Biggest reason I used this time around was the time frame between start to finish of when this sat. So that stuff does not move. It stays right there. There are plenty of other lubricants that do a fantastic job. We use the VP stuff on the Jeep, but we turn that in like a week.
Yep.
So that does a good job as well. But so if anybody's worried, oh my God, you changed? No, I didn't change. I've used multiple stuff depending on the overall situation. Now
there was a question. Somebody asked why you don't use that when you lube the pistons.
Yeah. So it's an assembly lube for bearings and valve trains. So I stick with just straight up 30 weight engine oil on my pistons and rings. That's what it's going to see in motion, and I've never, I guess I've never come across anybody that's done anything different than that. So I don't need to change the boat there. And again, I credit DSR when we went down there with the top fuel motors, and they were using the Redline, and they were using engine oil on their pistons. So
figure if it can handle
that horsepower,
3,000 horsepower.
Now we've already ran
11,000.
11,000.
Yeah.
We've already, in fact, I was watching over the weekend. One guy had a cylinder go out, and they're like, yeah, he's down 1,300 horse now. I was like, wow, that's crazy. Yeah. But no, so our motor's longevity is a little bit longer, but they're doing something right.
So we're to the point where we're putting the crankshaft in here, and this is what I said earlier, kind of, again, the part of you measuring and checking all those things also gives you a reference that you write all that stuff down.
Yep.
So then you can, when there's an issue like we had here,
Yes.
you can kind of go back and be like, okay, well, this is right, and this is right, and this is right. I know the bearings are right. I know the crankshaft is right. So what's the deal?
Correct. So I got into just purely the fact I knew I had all the right oil clearances. Everything was perfect that way on the mains at this point, and I had the rear main downs. I always start from the rear and go forward. I had the rear main in. It was tight. It wasn't great, but it was okay. I got number 4 in, and it was noticeably tight, and it was not getting better. I know we had something similar with the Jeep, but an inline is different scenario because of the length of that crankshaft and that you can get away with a little more resistance, I'll say. But on this is like the 3rd or 4th one I've done this year, so I a little more sensitive to it, and I'm like, yeah, this isn't right. So went through with the block nice and painted and clean, and had to go put it in the hone, a line hone, and run basically a big long bar down through it with honing oil everywhere. And yeah,
I will admit, when it came back and you had it all cleaned up, you couldn't even tell that it had been sort of messed with again from a beauty standpoint.
Well, and Mike wasn't, I was hovering, and he was like, I'm like, you're not going to set that there, right? You're not going to bump the paint off on me, are you? So
I'm sure he
kudos to Mike for his patience with me. But you get all that time and effort into it, and you really don't want to go backwards, but we had to. And again, it's my responsibility to make sure it's right. So you have to stop, you have to correct it, and move on.
And it worked.
And figure out the fix.
And it was like, I mean, for me and John, who don't know a ton of this, of seeing you turn it the first time and you kind of being like, ooh, and then once you got the line hone done, and then you're just like, oh, look at that, one finger, you can put some pressure on it.
Yeah, because I could turn it, and you would get a little bit of free spin after that, just a hair.
Yeah.
You could see it still moving. Now, some motors, you won't. Remember the Model A motor? The clearance is almost 0. It's like
with
1.
The Babbitt.
So that drag, it wouldn't turn without a breaker bar on it. But we had heads up that was the case. So it's somewhat of knowing the engine you're working on and what to expect.
So this shot is quick, and if one Davin is good, 2 is better, right?
One would think so. It's either more production or more chaos.
Right.
But if you notice, at least on the screen I'm looking at, the left Davin doesn't need glasses, but the right one does. Both are equally as.
This is super smart, nerdy Davin. This is
split personality.
Yeah, exactly. So that's again some fun stuff that I enjoy doing of trying to, I don't know, just be different with some of the stuff.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Give some little nuggets here and there
for
people to be
how
like, ooh, I wonder
how
what
I
you did
give
there.
myself a high five the next time.
Oh yeah,
that would be cool.
We just need a body double like they do in the movies or whatever.
Do we really?
Where you never show them at the same time. We just need somebody that looks the same from the back.
Right. I was gonna say, do we really want to find a double?
All right, so real quick, just kind of walk me through the rest of this here.
Right on. So basic assembly as far as the pistons are concerned. I go through it, I double check all the rings into the hole. We did have to file fit the uppers or the top ring. The secondary ring was good. And we've ran into this in the past where one of the rings was wrong. And not in this condition, but in the past where they were boxed up and one ring was wrong out of all the assembly. So that's why you go through and double check things, make sure you're in gaps, don't take anything for granted. And go from there. And then we basically assemble them onto the piston. It does make a difference where that gap is at, and there's all kind of literature where you position those gaps.
Can see there's a
I'm
freeze
rotating
frame
them.
there. Are you rotating?
Yeah, rotating them around. Again, assembly lube on the bearings, and then just straight 30 weight, both fair amount, if you will, on. They're not dripping, but wet down the bores, and then in the grooves of the piston, and then on the sleeves. Now, there's also some people that say you need to actually take a coffee can full of oil and physically dip the piston in there. I think that's a little excessive, but that's my own opinion. And I found my piston pounder. By the way, that thing is fantastic. If you don't have one, it works a lot better than a hammer.
The butt end of it.
Yeah, the butt end and a hammer. It's just a little more controlled. And then, of course, the old reliable sleeve, adjustable sleeve for the pistons. Make sure your rings are tight.
So, as covered in one of the update videos, and if you watch very closely here, you can see the timing
change.
I think in this shot you only see it change once.
Once.
So we go from that to, wait for it.
I think you went by it already.
No, I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Oh, there it is. There's another one. Yeah.
Oh, the holes got bigger and there's fewer of them.
Yeah. So,
brief recap.
I don't even want to speculate what's going on. I'm just going to state what I have found, because it's aggravating, quite honestly. So we went through 4 timing chains. We had the stock one with the nylon gear. I used that at some point in time. But the whole point here is I'm assembling it, and I need a degree in the camshaft. So the very first timing chain I put on, and mind you, these are all correct for the assembly. It's not like I have the wrong one. Let's just say it that way. The first one I put on, the chain was so tight, I'm not sure what fiddle tune I could have played, but it would have been a very high-pitched one. So that one obviously wasn't going to work long term, but I did do the degree and checked it, because it's like, all right, well, while I'm here, I might as well get some numbers off of it and then move on to another set. So all these timing chains have the ability to clock or degree the camshaft, advanced or retarded, from the bottom crank gear. They have multiple key positions. Yeah. So basically it changes the relationship of the cam relative to the crankshaft. And it moves it anywhere from 4 to 8 to, somewhere around that range, degrees. This camshaft should be installed at 106 degrees intake centerline. So all that really means is you go through and you rotate the camshaft, and you have the lobe of your cam, and you check it here before it's top dead, and you check it after at 50 thou, before 50 thou, after. And then those degree marks that you get off the crankshaft, you add them and then divide them, and that gives you the center line, right? So right where that peak is at. And then that's the number that you're looking for, you're measuring. This cam should be 106. Now, camshafts, to give you some numbers, anywhere from probably 102 would be about your lowest intake center line to up to maybe 112, maybe 114, somewhere in that range. But typically on the street, you're 106, 108, maybe a 110 if you're into that. Or yeah, 110, 110. Sorry, thank you. So anyhow, I put it in there. This particular one ran in dead zero it was like 108. I'm like, oh, that's not bad, but I can't use it because it's too tight. Excuse me. So I get the next chain. I install it. The chain's great. Go to degree that in. It's at 112 straight up. And I'm like, okay, well, I should be able to adjust it. That's why there's adjustment points, but it shouldn't be that far off to begin with. I move it 8 degrees all the way the one direction, and I'm still not where it needs to be because 8 degrees didn't amount to 8 degrees. Should be pretty straightforward and simple. Would not do it. I then in turn grabbed two more. I grabbed the stock one, stuck it in. Miraculously, it was dead on 106 with only one adjustment hole, right?
Yep.
It was dead on 106, right where it should be at. Of course, it's tired, and I can't use it, so moving on. I go grab another one.
But you were doing that because you wanted to check, like, man, is there something wrong with the crankshaft camshaft? Like, was the camshaft wrong? Like,
You're going through all the things, and of course you're going through your mind of, oh God, am I doing this measurement right? And it's like, it's just straightforward. Once you wrap your head around it one time, it's just straightforward. And so then I get another one, and that one was off 117 at the right at the beginning, and it didn't have enough. It didn't have enough rotation to even get it close. Anyway, that was only a 3-key. So then I grabbed a fourth one, I guess, and that one at least come in at 108, and then I was able to. That one actually was correctly, like when I degreed it back by 2 or 3. Yeah, 2. That one had 2. When it was 2, it went right to 106.
So 2 meant 2.
Yeah, 2 actually was 2. Yeah. So just by chance, if you happen to be a manufacturer of anything that takes a degree function, and let's use timing chains as an example, you might want to check the calibration on your machine. And I know I've had a lot of people tell me in the past that anything that's CNC'd, is perfect and never makes mistakes. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's not necessarily the case.
I mean, considering how many of these
and
small
these
blocks
CNC,
that you've done just this year, but then in the past in general, it'll be interesting to see, I think, from people watching who might be working on engines, small block Chevy themselves, to see, or as you're on forums or anything like that, to see if maybe it is something weird that's happening right now. Yep.
And if you're a camshaft guru, no, this was not a cam that you were supposed to already had 4 into it. You got to, none of that. Because I had that conversation. And one-piece gaskets on the oil pan are glorious.
Yep. And not cork.
But tip. Here, Rock Auto tip of the day.
There's no
haven't
oil
said it.
under there, right?
Make sure you put a little bit of sealant of whatever flavor you like in the corners. So right where it goes to, right, exactly right there, and then of course on the backside of the main. Just a little bit in there. It's gonna squish out. It'll be all right. You can cut it off later. And but that, it's always hard to get into the corners, and that goop gets you there. And the other thing, Clarence, is you can't over torque these, by the way. Well, I mean, you could break the bolts, but.
All right, and I was pretty jazzed with how this turned out.
That's cool.
We've done walking valve train before, but this was fun to do.
Ooh, yes. There isn't a cylinder shop in town that wouldn't like that. Bloop, bloop.
Yeah, if only it didn't actually take as long as it took me to do. Again, I will say though, as it was my first time disassembling any kind of engine before, this was my first time assembling a head. Yes. So I did pop out a few times when you were working on something else to say, hey, am I doing this right?
And you did a fine job.
Yes, considering in the past when we've done some head assemblies, we've had to disassemble them a few times just because things weren't quite right. Mm-hmm. We did not have to disassemble these.
Did not.
All right, we're getting close here.
Yes.
Now there was a question, and I know that we answered it in the update video, but there was a question at one point that somebody basically asked why the lifters were tied together. This pairs of lifters.
That's a fantastic question though, because these are so I went to a roller camshaft, so the lifters all have a roller or cylinder on the bottom of them. In a flat tappet camshaft, the bottom of the lifter is dead flat and is allowed to spin. If a roller lifter spins at all, then of course your roller on the bottom of your lifter is going to be against rotation. And that isn't going to be a good day for anybody. So that bar ties them from rotating. Now in stock applications, as far as GM stock, these are considered retro rockers, or I'm sorry, retrofit lifters. In a stock application, what they'll be is some sort of like a little figure eight, and the lifters will actually have a groove or two grooves on the sides of it, and there will be a piece that sets over top of it, and it might be contained by, you know, like a little piece of tin or tin work or something. I think if you look at in fact, I know I had on the Demon engine, if you go back, watch that video a couple hundred times, you will find in there, you can see that. You can see the groove in that lifter, because that's the only stock one we did. The Jeep wasn't roller, that was flat. But that's why that tie bar's in there, so it doesn't, the long story, so the lifter doesn't rotate. And of course, lube on them. Cylinder head down. Torque everything in sequence. That matters. And of course, 3 steps of torque.
So there was a question here, and we could talk about it briefly. Is as it has with a lot of the engines that we have done, based on your flat tappet with the Jeep, and then other ones that we've done of varying different setups with the valve train. Somebody wanted to know if you set lash, and how you set lash, and how you set that up.
Yep. So virtually no matter what you're doing, as far as the rockers are concerned, unless they're the style that the bolt just goes tight and it is what it is. But you have 2 styles of lifters. You either have solid or you have hydraulic. Solid lifters are going to adjust to a lash, a physical feeler gauge in between the rocker arm and the top of the valve stem. That gives you your gap, because in a solid lifter, as that warms up, that gap's going to be taken up, and you do not want that gap to start off at 0, because everything grows. You're going to have basically valves that are staying open, so that won't be good. And you don't want too much, because you don't want them slapping around and busting things up. On a hydraulic, you do the same thing, but slightly different. So you don't set lash with a feeler gauge. You set really a preload into the hydraulic lifter, and it's typically 30 to 40 thousandths. That comes out with the thread, that pitch that you have on your rocker stud in this particular case. So the rocker stud is, I forget what these are, fine, 3/8 fine. And so that pitch, a half a turn, gives you enough preload into there, because on a hydraulic, you don't want any gap, because that's what the hydraulic allows, is for all that clearance. As everything grows, it will actually move away, if you will, because you can compress that hydraulic portion. Think of it as a shock. And so then on those, you just turn them a half and then tighten them down. But you still have to go through the same exact sequence of setting that lash. So, you know, as your exhaust valve just starts to open, then you can set your intake valve. And then as your intake starts to fall after it goes over the max lift and it just starts to fall, then you can set your exhaust. And all you're doing is making sure that the lifter is on the base circle of the camshaft. And if you look at a camshaft profile, you'll see exactly what I mean.
Nice. So this was, and you can see your left hand here, you are in there feeling basically the push rod to know when it kind of has tension on it. Right
when it touches. So you're just taking and spinning that push rod. It's got grease on each end, but you're going to feel it. As soon as it makes some contact, you just roll it until you call it 0, which is what it is, by turning your nut, and then that's when you do that half turn and then lock it down.
Now, again, with this happening here, there was a question as to, okay, you did the roller lifters, you have the roller tipped rockers. Why didn't you do a full rocker or full roller rocker?
Well, quite simply because for the street motor, I'm not going to gain enough of going to a full rocker. I'll gain some on the tip as far as friction and all that's concerned based on the RPMs. but really more importantly, I can keep these rocker arms underneath the stock valve covers, so I don't have to have tall. If I go to the full rollers, they typically are a lot bigger rocker, and not that there aren't some that would fit, but in this case, these fit in there real nice. They're a nice alternative to stamped. The stock stamped ones like to open up. Literally, they'll peel. Ask me how I know that. And then you have some problems. So if you can avoid the stamped ones, these are a great alternative. And of course, the stamped ratios, or the ratio, if you will, of a stamped rocker arm is very inconsistent relative to these. Really like I don't know if it's technically right to call them a forging. They're not machined. They are some sort of poured function, forging, casting. I know it's not cast, but.
So yeah, I mean, your goal with this build in general was to, from an outside standpoint, to have it look completely stock, but then just give it, and you still want it to be a street motor. You're not going drag racing.
No.
So it's you want to have it.
Yep.
It needs to
exactly
look stock, but then be optimized as far as
exactly, because in the stock form of this motor, it was rated at 190 horse on a 283.
You have an estimate for kind of with the 30 over and everything, and the cam?
With that and the cam, I would say we probably gained 30, 40 horse out of it. So it's probably in the range, even with the, now it's not going to RPM a whole lot because of the 2-barrel intake and carburetor, but the throttle response is going to be glorious.
Nice.
So, but yeah, I would say we're stock-wise, the biggest ones were like 230 in Corvettes, 210 in Chevelles. So we should definitely be knocking on that door and be surprised. And again, it's not going to be a huge drag motor or nothing like that, but it's gonna move the Chevelle around very nicely.
So wrapping things up here, I will say another nice little detail is you have the ARP bolts, but then up top here, it's all stainless.
Yeah.
Again, to keep it looking as nice as it can for as long as it can.
Yes, exactly right. Yep.
Speaking of things looking nice.
Yeah. Cerakoted exhaust manifolds. And Cerakoted heat shields. So those are the stock heat shields that would have been on there. And these are also, if you go back and look, they are different exhaust manifolds than what we started with, because I found the right ones for it in another box.
All right, so there was a question /
poke.
Oh,
yes.
Did you get the distributor in right the first time?
I did. Ben didn't touch it after I was done, and I had a camera on there with I had a game cam.
You put your deer.
I put my game cam on it. Yeah, so I have footage that shows no one messed with it, and guess what? It was dead on.
Barked right out.
It did bark right out. But I will tell you this. So the gentleman from can't think of his name right now, but from Easy Run Test Stands, that our test stand is from. He called me up one day after we struggled with one of them, just one of them, and he said, "I got a little trick for you." I said, "Okay," because I've always done the spin it over, feel for compression in number one hole, boom, got it. Obviously, that's correct about 50% of the time. And what he said to do, which is perfect, he said, rotate the engine over, watching number one intake valve, and when the number one intake valve closes, look at your timing mark and rotate, continue turning it until the timing mark goes to 0. That is top dead center. And that would apply to every engine.
There you go.
Then it's just a matter of dropping it down the hole, and of course, making sure you put number one on the number one thing, but at least then you're dropping it in where it's supposed to be at.
So you're never gonna screw it up again, right?
Well, at least not until next time. Yeah. Right.
All right. Well, and this shot was for the long time Hagerty followers of which is the fun thing about this is that the first Redline rebuild video before it was even called Redline Rebuild.
Yes, correct.
That we kind of experimented with was a Chevy small block, and the ending of that video was the fan sort of spinning and then driving itself out of frame,
Yep.
which, by the way, if you haven't seen that, you should go back and watch it because it's
Yes.
still pretty fun.
Yep.
But as we learned with later on, that people they see this fresh built engine and they want to hear it run.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
So we transition here to a running engine. And now this is something that I didn't know, but that with your roller cam and all that stuff, there's not really a break-in process, so to speak.
Not in the
same way.
same manner that you get nervous about the solid lifters. Typically, I just run them up the temperature, let them cool, run them up the temperature a couple times, and they're good. With the flat tappet camshafts, you have to go through the whole break-in of 20 minutes, 2,000 to 2,500 RPM, and
now,
all those sorts of things.
You're still though putting in a break-in oil? You still have the high zinc content, all that fun stuff.
I still run all that. You just don't have to go through the quite honestly, the misery of a flat tappet camshaft.
Nice.
And you don't have to make any changes relative to springs. Reducing the spring load and all that jazz. You don't have to mess with all that. So.
Well, it ran. Now the only thing that needs to happen is somebody needs to get the car ready for it to go back in.
Yeah.
So a couple more questions here, just from comments from the video from the last day or so here. But actually, we should have maybe talked about one of them. But what did we strip the paint off with?
That is old school aircraft remover, is what it's called.
So it removes aircraft from
Yeah, thankfully we only did it during off hours relative to the airport because we're that close.
Yep, wanted to be careful.
It's a heavy ammonia smell, would be a good way to put that.
Yep.
But it does work phenomenal. And you can certainly tell what paints are better than others because it'll take a couple tries at it. It's good stuff. So well ventilated area is a good idea.
And also, as much as people get on you about wearing gloves for things and how much you don't, that is something you want to wear.
That's when I wear gloves.
Wear gloves for.
Yeah, it has some acidic power, if you will.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not correct, but it burns.
If it can eat through automotive paint, then it's
no. If it's
not
on your skin, it burns.
Nice things to your skin.
Yeah.
I
wear gloves when I'm welding too.
And I think
same reason.
I think you kind of answered this already, but why the stock carbon manifold?
Yeah, that's purely for aesthetics relative to when the car, everything's all said and done, call it pure stock, open up the hood, doesn't look any different from that aspect.
Nice.
And again, 2-barrel carburetors, there's plenty of racing series that use 2-barrel carburetors. They're very responsive off the corners for like street stuff, off the corners. And you're gonna run out of steam on the higher RPMs, but as far as like, a mad dash, like if you run this at a drag strip, you'll find it'll wind out and top out RPM because it just can't breathe. But and that's where a 4-barrel carburetor really comes in, is that extra air pumping through it. But with this, for what it's going to see, the intake wise, it's going to be great.
Okay, so last question here is how long did this take us?
Well, it's actually pretty easy because it was done the day more or less, 2 days, 3 days before we released it, right? Which was yesterday. So it was done last week. And we started it when the Jeep was not done.
Right. So just before, I would say I probably started disassembling it, 2-3 weeks before the Jeep was done? 2 weeks before?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
So 4 months?
Yeah.
It was mid-April when the Jeep released.
May, June. Was it really?
Yeah, so it's,
Oh, wow. So it's 3 months.
So 3 months.
Yeah.
but that's taking into account that we are filming everything, which.
Oh, yeah.
Which I will, so I'll take that into a question that was asked on the video, which was, if you had the knowledge, the machine shop equipment, if you had everything that you needed,
no distractions,
parts, everything, how long would it take you to rebuild an engine?
Start to finish.
And I'll just say, start to finish, and everything will fit.
Right. So just to kind of quickly break it down, you're going to have a day to tear down, opposed to 2 weeks.
Hey.
I had
It
to
looks
do
cool.
It looks very
looks
cool.
cool.
So you'd have a day to tear down. You would have probably 2 days, let's say, of just cleaning parts yourself. You're still gonna have 1 day of painting. You're gonna have a good day. Well, a machine shop. I mean, you truly could turn the heads and
in a
machine
day.
shop of more than 2 people could turn heads and block in a day, and then you're going to have probably 2 days of assembly, type of thing. So you'd be about a week.
In a perfect world, you could do
In
it
a very perfect world, yes. So again, and it falls right in line. So John, like you said, at Apex puts together about 50 engines a week, or 50 engines a year. So that's 1 a week.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that
7
lines up.
days.
Especially when
bad.
you're that sort of shop where it's like you have a process, and
Yeah.
most of the stuff that you're building is similar enough. I mean, he does specialty stuff that guys ask him to do,
Well, in every box you open, the parts are different.
which is why you measure and measure
And
check
measure, yes.
and measure and check and measure again.
It's like building a house. Keep measuring.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll leave you here with the sweet sounds of a running 283 Chevy small block.
Yep.
But well done.
Thank you. Whoa.
Ooh, that was interesting.
Man, I broke your hand.
I've been sitting here like thinking about cracking my knuckles, but you did it
Jeez.
for me.
Yeah, no, it was a good project. It turned out well.
Yeah.
And on to the next one.
On to the next one, which you'll find out about next week.
Yes, stay tuned.